Liu Sheng focused, extended his hand, and a powerful golden martial energy began to emerge from his hand. Not long after, the star disk of destiny was activated. But this time, instead of emitting a blue glow, it began to emit an orange glow. While Liu Sheng was activating the star disk, Lan's attention was fixed on him and his eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped in shock. He could not believe what his eyes were witnessing. While martial flames were surrounding Liu Sheng's body with a confident smile, he decided it was time to show everyone his true power. An immense amount of martial energy began to emerge from Liu Sheng's hand, creating a golden explosion of energy. Liu Sheng's martial fire transformed into a tornado, which began to spin in front of the star disk. Even though the star disk was gigantic, the martial fire tornado was even bigger. Upon seeing this, the warriors' eyes filled with surprise, leaving them in shock. No one knew what was happening. Lan's expression changed. Instead of being surprised, he couldn't help but sweat and feel fear, realizing that Liu Sheng was radiant sun level. With an expression full of excitement, Lan clenched his fists, and with a proud smile began to cheer on our boy upon confirming that he really was blazing sun level, and not just anyone. Liu Sheng began to gaze toward the ground in silence, and a strange but powerful energy appeared around his body. Lan finally realized that Liu Sheng was a burning sun level that far surpassed that of Lan Che. With a confused expression, the bald man began to sweat and asked his friend what was happening. The friend's eyes widened in surprise. He didn't know what to say. Not even the powerful warrior's presence knew what was happening. Liu Sheng's body began to release even more energy. Everyone's attention focused on him, wondering who this person really was and where such a monster had come from. Mo Yun began to observe in silence, not knowing what to say, while on the other side, Lan Che's eyes widened with confusion and surprise, despite not clearly understanding what was happening. He was certain that something incredible was about to happen. With an expression full of fear, Lan Che could not help but wonder what level of power was needed to unleash a stellar glow like this. Mo Yun was in shock and speechless, with an expression of surprise at the revelation. He thought it was incredible that this young man was so extraordinary, and had also reached the blazing sun level. Our boy couldn't help but feel happy and smile. Liu Sheng decided to see how the star disk of destiny would react if he changed martial energy. Not long after, his golden martial energy transformed into dark martial energy. Liu Sheng began to imbue his energy into the star disk and with a confident smile thought that it probably still wasn't enough. Liu Sheng decided it was time to use more of his power and his energy began to enter into the star disk, making a golden glow appear in it. With an expression full of determination, Liu Sheng began to smile, as he was not satisfied with this level of achievement. Liu Sheng began to shout and used all his martial energy. His energy began to clash against the star disk, but Liu Sheng was not going to give up so easily. He released even more energy, and not long after, several phoenixes made of martial fire emerged and began to fly through the sky. Liu Sheng's martial fire shot toward the sky. Its power was so immense that the powerful warriors panicked and their eyes filled with surprise and fear. They began to point at our boy with their fingers, realizing that this force had completely distorted space. While they were distracted, one of them started to point toward the sky and asked everyone to look. Upon hearing this, the others became somewhat curious and decided to turn around. One of them turned around and upon seeing what had appeared in the sky, his eyes filled with tears and fear, making him sweat like crazy. He could not comprehend what kind of power this was. The powerful martial spirit of Liu Sheng began to descend from the sky. Compared to it, the warriors were like small ants. In that instant, many of those present understood with overwhelming clarity the existence of an immense gap in talent, one they could never cross in their entire lives. Lan's attention was fixed on our boy's martial spirit and his eyes widened in surprise. He couldn't help but tremble without knowing how it was possible for a 16,000-meter martial spirit to exist. Lan began to observe carefully and stepped back. He was in shock upon realizing that Liu Sheng's martial spirit was twice the size of his own supreme rank flame and lightning martial spirit. Mo Yun, who was standing next to him, remained silent, not saying a single word. Lan's eyes began to shine with terror and his body started trembling. He couldn't believe that Liu Sheng's aura was still at level 9. Just then, Yun lost his balance. Lan's attention focused on him and his eyes filled with confusion and curiosity. Mo Yun fell on his butt to the ground. He was in shock upon seeing how terrifying Liu Sheng's power was. Mo Yun calmed down and began to observe carefully the martial spirit of Liu Sheng. His eyes widened in confusion. It seemed impossible to him that he was only level 9, and he began to question who he really was. At the same time, our boy extended his hand toward the sky. While his eyes shone and the martial fire emerged from his body, he noticed that such a large manifestation of the martial spirit was actually difficult to control and that concentrating all the power in the body was the best choice. Liu Sheng cracked his fingers and while his eyes were shining with joy, with a smile he decided it was time to get down to work. His powerful martial spirit shrank and appeared behind him. Without wasting any more time, Liu Sheng placed his hand on the stellar disk of destiny. With a confident expression, Liu Sheng began to imbue his power into the stellar disk. And with a smile gave the order to his martial spirit to spin the stellar disk. Liu Sheng's martial spirit began to consume all its energy, causing our boy to clench his teeth tightly and begin shouting with determination. Not long after, little by little the pearls of the stellar disk began to activate, until several seconds later, the stellar disk began to spin like it never had before. Lan Che began to bleed from the mouth because he had used too much martial energy before. His subordinate reacted in time and, supporting him on his own shoulder, prevented him from falling to the ground. With a confused and worried expression, he asked if he was okay. Blood began to emerge from Lan Che's eyes and mouth. With eyes shining with rage, he stared fixedly at Liu Sheng and clenched his teeth tightly. For him, this was impossible, it simply could not be. The only thing Lan Che could do was feel furious and silently observe Liu Sheng's display of power. His subordinate began to sweat and clenched his teeth at the thought that even Lan Che had to use both hands with all his strength to rotate the falling star stellar diagram. And yet, Liu Sheng did it with one hand, as if it were a rolling wheel. He began to wonder if this was reasonable, scientific or even real, questioning whether they were still in the Yamu region. While all energies were emerging from Liu Sheng's body, the Destiny stellar disk was spinning at full speed. Not far away there was a spaceship. Liu Sheng's energy caused the ship to become destabilized. Inside the ship were the elders of the Yamu Federation, who began to observe the energy in silence, not knowing what was happening. The attention of the blonde-haired woman focused on it. Despite being in shock, she remained calm, but deep down she realized that this power simply could not be described with words. Her eyes began to shine with confusion and surprise. She had thought that Lan had only found someone with outstanding talent, but it turned out he was a genius as brilliant as the sun. With a surprised gaze, the elf-eared elder began to scream like a madman. He could not believe that a level 9 warrior had reached blazing sun level. And that he had also done so by going far beyond the maximum limit. The woman began to ponder in silence, not knowing how Lan had found a genius like Liu Sheng. With a curious gaze, the old man turned around, clenched his fists and gave the order to his men to accelerate the spaceship at full speed to see that genius immediately. His men bowed their heads before him and nodded. At the same time, while the star disk was spinning and the pearls on it shining intensely, Liu Sheng's eyes widened with confusion and curiosity. He could not believe that the star disk showed that he was only at blazing sun level of 9 stars. Liu Sheng closed his eyes and couldn't help but wonder what lay beyond the blazing sun level. Lan hadn't told him and he felt some curiosity, so he was going to try it first, but carefully, not to break this star disk by spinning it. With a determined expression, Liu Sheng placed both hands on the star disk, and martial fire began to emerge from his body. He gave the order to his martial spirit to hold the star disk tightly, while he activated the aura of the illuminated Dark King to its maximum in order to gain a boost of blood and energy. Liu Sheng focused and a wave of evil energy shot out from his body. Upon noticing this, Lan Che was surprised. He was paralyzed with fear since, according to him, this was impossible, completely impossible. Even in the main region of the Tianxi star system, very few reached beyond the blazing sun level, so he wondered by what right he could achieve something like that. The jaw of his subordinate dropped in shock. For him, 9 stars of blazing sun, or even the maximum level, were not enough. Reaching beyond the blazing sun level was not something so easy, and it seemed a bit exaggerated to him. The star disk was spinning so fast that it was almost impossible to see, even emitting a sound of jammed gears. This meant that the path ahead had ended and there were no more possibilities to advance. Liu Sheng's attention was fixed on it and his eyes began to shine with confusion. He remained silent, not knowing what to do now. Then, with a confident expression, Liu Sheng began to smile upon realizing that he still had energy left and that his supreme stellar body was not limited to 9 burning sun stars. If this still wasn't enough, then he would simply put in more strength. Liu Sheng's veins began to shine. With a determined smile, he decided to give his best. His 10,000 immortal cells burned furiously, transforming and evolving once again, and radiating an even brighter golden glow that emerged on his brow, like the third eye of a god. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Liu Sheng stretched out his hands, and as a suffocating martial energy emanated from his body, he began to shout, imbuing all his energy into the star fate disk. Not long after, the pearls began to emit an intense glow, capable of blinding any powerful warrior. Liu Sheng wasn't finished yet. He concentrated the power of his immortal cells on his forehead, making it begin to glow. His power was increasing so rapidly that his shirt tore into pieces. His energy entered the star disk like a tornado, activating all the pearls. Liu Sheng's attention was fixed on it, and his eyes widened with joy, a surprised smile appearing on his face. For even his clothes had exploded from the pressure, and despite this, the disk still resisted opening. With a gaze full of determination, Liu Sheng placed his foot on the star disk in. As a powerful energy flowed from his foot, he ordered it to keep opening, to open once and for all. Our boy was so strong that his foot began to destroy the star fate disk bit by bit. At that moment, the pearl in the center of the disk activated, and a powerful yet strange black energy began to erupt from it. Golden clouds appeared in the sky, and a golden blast of martial energy struck the star disk head-on. It rose into the sky with a roar that shattered the boundaries of the world. Meanwhile, at Count Sia's mansion, far from where the star disk was, it was daytime. Inside the mansion, someone was sitting. They turned on their mobile phone and saw the news circulating about Milton, the piggy killer. This person was none other than Milton, who was sitting on his sofa. Upon reading the news, he couldn't help but get angry, and with a gaze full of rage, he forcefully threw his phone to the ground. Smashing it to pieces, Milton turned around, and his eyes widened in surprise and curiosity. From the mansion window, the cloud summoned by the star fate disk could be seen. Milton's attention fixed on them, and his eyes widened in confusion. He didn't know what was happening. At the same time, in a private and luxurious residence on some planet, a red-haired woman was sitting on her bed browsing her phone, holding a rabbit-shaped stuffed animal. She opened a messaging app and began to chat silently with her friends. This woman was none other than Chiao Chiao. Her eyes widened with curiosity as something caught her attention. From her room's window, the cloud summoned by the star fate disk could also be seen. She turned around, and upon noticing this, she couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and curious. Not knowing what was happening, the waves emitted by the star-fate disk began to spread throughout the entire galaxy. These invisible waves traveled much farther than imaginable, traversing countless light years in the dark and silent vastness of space, regardless of whether it was an advanced and prosperous planet full of a high-level civilization. Not far away, on a nearby planet, a woman with elf ears was serving tea to some men who were seated. She felt the waves and turned towards the direction where the star disk was. Even some goblin-like inhabitants could feel the waves. At the same time, on the blue planet, on a quiet day, people began to look up at the sky with surprised expressions. Whether on a backward and wild planet with a primitive civilization or on a remote and uninhabited garden planet, every life form in the entire Yamu region that was traversed by this invisible wave felt a strange vibration resonate in its heart. This brought them a genuine and seemingly reasonless joy that sprang from the depths of their souls. Because of this, people clasped their hands, and their eyes filled with tears of joy. Even those who a moment before were deep in sorrow were, in the next instant, moved to tears. The invisible wave began to expand throughout the entire galaxy. The vast majority didn't understand the reason, but they could clearly feel that this vast starry sky was celebrating, rejoicing, and praising the appearance and birth of a great being. The starry sky sang, and everyone sang along. Witnessing this, the blonde woman was surprised, and her jaw dropped in shock, for she understood that an immortal level being had just been born. In the Yamu region, an immortal level bloodline had truly appeared, the eyes of the elder with elf ears filled with surprise, a joyful smile appearing on his face as he confirmed that this was indeed of an immortal level. Without wasting any more time, the elder activated his power and gathered momentum. With a gaze full of determination, he took a leap, broke through the spaceship's window, and began to fly towards the area where Liu Sheng was with a smile, as his Yamu region was about to rise again with supreme splendor. The woman's attention fixed on him, she began to watch the elder in silence, not knowing what this old man had in mind. The spaceship was flying very close to the area. At that moment, the pearl in the middle of the star-fate disk began to unleash martial thunders. As Liu Sheng's energy was expanding throughout the area, Lan Che and his men began to watch attentively, their eyes wide with confusion and curiosity. They didn't know what was happening. As the star destiny disk spun, Mo Yun panicked. He recognized this as supreme power, the core around which the great force of the galaxy had revolved for tens of thousands of years. With an excited smile, he mentioned that he now remembered the ancient warning of the ancient starboard. Just before Mo Yun could say another word, Lan Che approached him and, with a serene expression, questioned if this was it. Upon hearing Lan Che's voice, Mo Yun turned around and began to ponder in silence. With a confident smile, Mo Yun extended his hand toward the star disk, revealing that when the legendary immortal bloodline descended, the center of the starboard would ignite a light that would shake the cosmos. An incredible spectacle would appear, and the entire galaxy would celebrate as one. Lan Che began to contemplate the star disk in silence, not fully understanding what was about to happen. With a serious gaze, Mo Yun began to point at our boy, for the warning had been fulfilled. Everything the legend foretold was happening before their very eyes. As thunder erupted from Liu Sheng's body, he clenched his fist tightly and remained. Mo Yun exclaimed that he was seeing this legend about him with his own eyes, recognizing that this was an immortal being, a supreme immortal bloodline. Far from feeling excited, Liu Sheng's eyes began to glow with tranquility. He put his hand in his pants pocket and decided to take out his phone. Our boy posed in, with a smile, took a selfie with the star disk in the background. He wanted to have this moment as a memento. After taking the selfie, Liu Sheng decided it was time to send it to someone. First, he opened his chat with Snowy and sent her the photo, mentioning that he had taken it himself and asking if it looked good. In an extremely distant star region, from an advanced spaceship, someone was observing everything that had just happened. Inside the ship was the star throne, and as starlight entered the interior, a man sitting on the throne and wearing knight armor began to awaken slowly. The white-haired man wearing a golden crown awoke, and his eyes began to glow with curiosity and seriousness. He clenched his fist tightly, gazed down, and noticed that another bloodline above the immortal level had appeared. He smiled to himself, as this meant that his Tianqi star system would experience an era of unprecedented glory in this cycle. As a powerful aura emerged from his body, he extended his hand. As his eyes shone with curiosity, his attention fixed on his hand. He concluded that, for now, this didn't matter. Liu Sheng's current level was too low. If he revealed himself at this moment, he ran the risk of perishing prematurely. He closed his eyes and decided to return to sleep, considering it better to let him train and grow for longer down there. Only then would he summon him. At the same time, the warriors began to talk amongst themselves with expressions full of astonishment. Frustrated that this monstrous genius who had shaken the firmament had appeared, and they didn't even know his name or identity. The elder clenched his fists and as his eyes shone with determination, began to observe Liu Sheng. He swore to himself that he had to find him. The idea of having him marry his daughter crossed his mind, but no, he would settle for just a single strand of his hair. An evil smile spread across the elder's face and his eyes widened with malice. He knew that with Liu Sheng's power, his clan would prosper for all eternity. Meanwhile, in the vastness of space, a starship traveled at full speed. Inside, someone was wondering in utter disbelief what kind of monster was responsible for this phenomenon. Inside the spaceship, Lan was sitting with a serene expression, lost in thought. Lan's body began to tremble, and his eyes filled with fear. He knew Liu Sheng was outstanding, but he had never imagined he would go so far as to make the entire firmament celebrate him. In front of Lan stood Liu Sheng, his arms crossed and lost in thought. Lan's attention fixed on our boy, and he admitted to himself that while he knew Liu Sheng was exceptional, he never dreamed it would be to this extent. Lan's eyes widened in terror. This was unheard of. He wondered if he had found the very son of God from the prophecy. This left poor Lan paralyzed with shock. As Liu Sheng's eyes glowed with tranquility, he slowly began to turn around. Our boy crossed his arms and began to gaze towards the screen, revealing that, in reality, what had just happened was the limit of the star fate disk, but not his own limit. Hearing this, Lan snapped out of his thoughts, his eyes widening in surprise, his jaw dropped. He couldn't believe what Liu Sheng had just said. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, it was daytime, and somewhere in the Yamu region stood the Supreme Chamber of the Federal Senate of the Yamu sector. Not long after, Liu Sheng arrived. When the door opened, with a serene expression, Liu Sheng began to walk inside. Lan, who had his arms crossed, started to follow him in silence. In the Supreme Chamber of the Federal Senate, two people were waiting for our boy's arrival. It was the elder with elf ears and the blonde woman. The elder's eyes began to shine with surprise and joy. He couldn't believe that the legendary warrior Liu Sheng had come. The woman's attention fixed on our boy, making her feel somewhat nervous. Without wasting any more time, the elder grabbed Liu Sheng's hand and, with a sincere expression, gave him a warm welcome. He couldn't believe that Liu Sheng was a true hero at such a young age. With a curious gaze, the woman began to observe our boy. Liu Sheng began to ponder in silence, not knowing what to say. The elder and the woman closed their eyes and began to show charming smiles. While they were conversing, Lan's eyes filled with tranquility, a smile appearing on his face. He had just understood. This was an immortal level being. He couldn't believe that Liu Sheng was the same person he had recruited in the White Mist Zone. Lan's eyes began to shine with joy. He understood that life sometimes offers a blessing of fortune, and that his duty was to hold on to our boy with all his might. Liu Sheng began to show a pleasant smile. Lan's attention fixed on our boy, and he couldn't help but smile. He felt that this time, he hadn't just tightly gripped the hand of the goddess of fortune. He had hugged her with all his might. Lan's eyes widened with confidence, and the image of Liu Sheng smiling came to his mind. He knew that Liu Sheng was the greatest fortune of his entire life. Not even winning the grand prize of the Xingyun lottery would come close to 1/10,000th of its value. The elder placed his hand over his chest and with a smile mentioned that he was Pavlov Sebastian, chairman of the House of Representatives of the Yamu Sector Federation. Liu Sheng simply began to smile in silence. Sebastian extended his hand toward the blonde woman and introduced her as Ecclesia, the chief of law enforcement of the Yamu sector. She placed her hand over her chest as a sign of respect and with a smile mentioned that it was an honor for her to meet the powerful warrior Liu Sheng. With a gaze full of determination, Sebastian clenched his fist. He declared that, from this night on, Liu Sheng's name would spread throughout the entire Yamu sector and that, even in the distant future, these two words would make the cosmos itself tremble. As our boy's eyes shone with serenity, he replied that the chairman was very kind, but was overestimating him. Ecclesia approached our boy and in a serious tone revealed that, with the Yamu sector as the center radiating out to the surroundings, there were a total of 13 sectors. Hearing this, Liu Sheng's attention fixed on her, leaving him somewhat curious. She began to gaze intently at our boy, revealing that since the founding of the Federation of Star Sectors, in almost 1,000,000 years, and among trillions of planets with life, a transcendent, immortal level being had never appeared. For this reason, it was no exaggeration to call Liu Sheng the greatest genius this region of the universe had seen in 1,000,000 years, a genius unprecedented in all of history. Liu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Liu Sheng took a step forward, extended his hand, and asked if truly, among the hundreds of trillions of individuals spread across 13 star sectors, only one transcendent, immortal level body like his had emerged. His mind filled with confusion. But then he rationalized it. He understood that his stellar supreme physique was destined to reach level 15, and even 16. In the entire star domain, powerhouses of that caliber must be extremely rare. That being the case, it was reasonable that he was the only one in more than a dozen sectors in 1,000,000 years. With a serene gaze, Sebastian explained to our boy that, normally, if an immortal level being were to emerge in a star sector, the Lord of the Galaxy would undoubtedly send someone to investigate. He added that he might have the opportunity to join their ranks and receive the legacy of the System Lord. Liu Sheng began to listen to Sebastian attentively. With a smile, Sebastian extended his hand and assured him that, until the Lord of the Galaxy sent his representatives, the Yamu sector would provide him with all its support in his cultivation. Hearing this, Liu Sheng couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and asked what they meant by total support. Sebastian closed his eyes and nodded, then directed his gaze toward the floor and revealed that, although Liu Sheng was of immortal level, only at level 9 for now, and the resources of an entire star sector like theirs were more than enough to sustain just him. Liu Sheng put his hand under his chin and, with a smile, questioned if, in that case, he was free to present any petition. Liu Sheng began to show a joyful gaze, Sebastian's attention fixed on him, causing his mind to fill with confusion. He didn't know what our boy had in mind. Sebastian began to touch his cheek, forcing a smile. He assured him that he could ask for whatever he wanted and they would listen, promising to do everything possible to fulfill it if it was within their reach. However, a thought invaded his mind, fearing that Liu Sheng was about to demand something outrageous. While Sebastian was lost in thought, Liu Sheng began to shake his hand. With a sincere gaze, our boy revealed that he didn't need resources for his cultivation. What he needed was a habitable planet large enough to settle his compatriots from his home planet. Sebastian's eyes widened in confusion and surprise. Sebastian and Ecclesia looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Liu Sheng remained silent, awaiting Sebastian's response. Lan began to observe our boy with a curious expression. Lan's eyes began to shine with surprise. Admiring that he had always cared about his backward home planet, Lan stared intently at our boy, a proud smile appearing on his face. He reflected that perhaps this was the root of Liu Sheng's meteoric rise, the singular educational system of the Dragon Nation. It was truly an enigmatic country. Not long after, several servants carrying plates of food began to rush towards the dining hall. Although day and night did not exist in space, the human custom of measuring stellar time persisted. Just as this stellar day, equivalent to about 3 blue planet days, was about to conclude, a banquet of unparalleled magnificence was being feverishly prepared. They began to prepare a banquet. If it weren't for the fact that each and every one had felt this miraculous phenomenon of the cosmos celebrating in unison, no one would have dared to believe in the birth of an immortal level being. A powerful blast of energy descended from space upon the planet, and not long after, hundreds of spaceships appeared in the sky like stars. These countless ships plied the space between the main planet and its 10 satellites, creating a spectacular scene of incessant traffic on a cosmic scale. All for the sole purpose of glimpsing the creator of this prodigy. It was night, and as the moon shone high in the sky, somewhere stood the grand banquet hall. Milton, wearing elegant attire, appeared, ready to attend the banquet. Beside him was his sister, Xiao Xiao, who was somewhat nervous as she wore a ceremonial outfit. The grand banquet hall was packed with guests. Milton's attention fixed on them, and, with a curious gaze, he mentioned that this was the first immortal in the history of the Yamu sector, and the news was just beginning to spread. He reflected that, if they waited a few more days, the scale of the event would multiply 100-fold, and the entire Yamu sector probably wouldn't be able to handle it. As Xiao Qiu's eyes were shining, she began to observe the guests in silence. With a serious expression, Milton turned to his sister and insisted that, when that person appeared later, she must do absolutely everything possible to win his friendship. Xiao Qiao felt somewhat surprised and couldn't help but blush like a tomato, asking with a nervous smile if he really wanted her to do this. She placed her hand on her chest and looked away, wondering if such an important person would find her acceptable. Milton grabbed Xiao Qiao by the arm, leaned in close to her, and with a piercing gaze made it clear that she had to succeed. He was convinced that, with her beauty, the only reason she could possibly fail was if this immortal level genius didn't like women. Xiao Qiu's eyes filled with sadness. She didn't know what to do. Just then, someone touched Milton's butt. With a furious expression, Milton turned around, thinking that even if the genius didn't like women, that wasn't a problem either. Once Milton turned around, he saw 2 men. With an arrogant expression, the man with elf ears recognized him and exclaimed mockingly, "Milton, the pig killer." With a smile, the other man asked Milton if he had met his quota for the day. Calling him pig killer, Milton's eyes widened with rage, causing him to clench his teeth tightly. Meanwhile, the man mentioned that they had heard the news. The man with elf ears mocked him, calling him the 150-year-old god of war, the cruel executioner of pigs. With an expression full of rage, Milton turned around and decided it was time to leave this place. Once Milton turned around, he saw that his sister had disappeared. He couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Not knowing where she was, Milton's eyes began to glow. It raged as he realized that even Xiao Qiao despised him. He told himself that he had to find this person and make them announce out loud, in front of the entire Yamu sector, that he, Milton Sith, did not have strange fetishes and was not the pig killer. Fuming, Milton began to search for his sister. With an arrogant smile, the man with elf ears told his friend to keep spreading Milton's story, as he considered him finished. However, he pointed out that Milton's sister, Xiao Xiao, could be their competition. With a confused look, his friend questioned if the story was true or false. The elf-eared man's eyes began to glow with malice. To him, it didn't matter if the story was true or not. If it was useful to them, then it was true. Lan Che was also present at the banquet. Poor Lan Che was depressed. Milton's attention fixed on him. He couldn't believe Lan Che had come too. A confident smile spread across his face as he considered that if they couldn't get close to that great figure, allying with Lan Che was a very good alternative. And this was the moment. Fuming his head from side to side, Milton began to walk around. Wondering about Xiao Xiao, he realized that, right now, the key was to find her. Not far away, Xiao Xiao was chatting with a smile with Lu Sheng. Noticing this, a relieved smile spread across Milton's face, wondering who she was chatting with so cheerfully. Lu Sheng began to show a smile, and Milton panicked. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, as Liu Sheng and Cao Cao were chatting calmly, Milton, with a furious expression and fuming, began to walk towards them. Calling Liu Sheng a wretch. Milton clenched his teeth, his eyes glowing with rage. He yelled that he was an insignificant thing who didn't know what was good for himself and reprimanded him for daring to approach Cao Cao on an occasion as important as this. Milton shouted his sister's name. Hearing Milton's voice, Cao Cao's eyes filled with surprise, making her turn somewhat curious. She approached Milton, gestured towards Liu Sheng and, in a calm and sincere tone, told her brother to look who she had found, as Liu Sheng had also come. With his face burning with rage, Milton stared at Liu Sheng in silence. Instead of feeling intimidated or nervous, Liu Sheng simply showed a tranquil smile. With an arrogant expression, Milton accused him of having gotten into this event by relying on Lon. He told him that, clearly, he hadn't taken his warning seriously at all, and in that case, he would tell him one more time. Clenching his fists tightly and with a furious glare, Milton yelled at him to get out of there right now, or else both he and his miserable home planet would be destroyed. Liu Sheng simply remained silent, unbothered by Milton's threats. While Milton was barking, someone was delighted to have found who they were looking for. Upon hearing this, Milton's eyes filled with surprise and curiosity. He didn't know what was happening. Once Milton turned around, his arrogant expression changed, leaving him in shock. It was none other than the powerful and intimidating warrior Lan. Put his arms behind his back and began to show a tranquil smile. The arrogant Milton's eyes widened with joy. A smile appearing on his face. He wondered if Lan Che had been speaking to him a moment ago and if he had come looking for him. Lan Che began to walk towards them in silence, unaware of what Milton had in mind. Forcing a smile, Milton extended his hand and offered his sincerest apologies, explaining that he was just preparing to go look for His Excellency, and didn't expect him to be one step ahead and arrive first. Liu Sheng, who was standing behind Milton, remained silent, thinking that this guy was a weirdo. Closing his eyes, Milton began to show a nervous expression, introducing himself as Milton's Sith. Lan Che approached them and began to observe Milton in silence with a confused gaze. Lan Che stared at him intently and with a cold expression asked who he was and why he was blocking his path. Milton's expression changed drastically, his eyes widening in surprise and confusion, questioning if His Excellency hadn't come looking for him. Coldly, Lan Che placed a hand on Milton's back and pushed him out of the way, ordering him to get lost and not interfere while he was speaking with Mr. Liu. Milton lost his balance and with an expression full of questions and confusion, fell face first to the ground. Not knowing what was happening or why Lan Che was so interested in someone like Liu Sheng, Lan Che began to walk towards Liu Sheng in silence. Our boy showed no expression, and people started to gather to see what was happening. With a smile full of admiration, Lan Che placed his hand over his chest as a sign of respect and told His Excellency Liu Sheng that his immortal level bloodline was an extremely rare existence. Even in the main star sector of the Tianxi galaxy, Liu Sheng simply began to observe Lan Che took out a golden card and offered it to him, explaining that the Yamu sector would become too small for him very soon. Liu Sheng took the golden card and his eyes widened in surprise and curiosity. With a confident smile, Lan Che revealed that he hoped that, when His Excellency went to the main star sector, he could visit the Lan family's home as a guest. He clarified that this was an invitation he was formally extending on behalf of his father, Marquis Lanyo. He called Liu Sheng a warrior of an immortal level bloodline. Hearing this, the guests present went into shock, unable to believe what Lan Che had just said. With his face covered in sweat, one of the men asked his friend if Liu Sheng was the legendary immortal level 1. With an uncertain look, his friend turned around and mentioned that, after so much searching, it turned out to be such an insignificant-looking young man. While Liu Sheng and Lan Che were conversing, the man began to observe Liu Sheng, and his eyes widened with joy and surprise. For he understood that even the Lan Che family had to extend a formal invitation on behalf of their clan to try and win him over, going as far as to call him by the honorific of His Excellency. With a kind smile, Liu Sheng continued to converse with Lan Che, so the others decided they too had to go and establish a good relationship with this great lord. The crowd of guests began to rush towards Liu Sheng, calling out to him. Noticing this, Liu Sheng turned around and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. The crowd surrounded our boy, and they all begged him to visit their humble abodes, to come and sit in their homes, or to join their families. Liu Sheng panicked. He didn't know what to do now. Upon learning that Liu Sheng was the legendary immortal level warrior, Milton's eyes filled with fear. He realized that this nobody he had always looked down on, the one he was convinced was approaching Kiao over and over again trying to climb his way up to the Sich family, turned out to be the true protagonist of tonight's celebration banquet. While a crowd was surrounding Liu Sheng, Milton simply stood there watching in silence, trying to comprehend what he had done. Foam began to form at Milton's mouth as he wondered in disbelief if this was that legendary and utterly mysterious possessor of the immortal level bloodline, the super genius of the Yamu star sector, who was born only once every million years. Milton fell to the ground, and tears of fear began to stream from his eyes. Not only had he failed to establish a connection with him, but he had also offended him twice. It was over. If his family found out, he would be completely finished. Meanwhile, not far away, the sensual Kiao was observing everything in silence. She placed a hand over her mouth and couldn't help but feel somewhat nervous and in surprise, wondering if he was the genius who had caused that day's phenomenon. Liu Sheng began to lose his patience. He turned around and with a serious expression explained to Lan Che that he had a small problem right now, but that he would consider his proposal. Lan Che bowed his head to Liu Sheng as a sign of respect. He acknowledged that it seemed so, and thanked His Excellency Liu Sheng. With smiles, the guests began to chant Liu Sheng's name. As Liu Sheng's eyes glowed, he turned to the crowd, and seeing so many people piling up became a headache, so he knew he would have to get through this however he could. At the same time, Lan Cheng's spaceship landed, and from it emerged Lan Cheng and Chao Lin. The sun was shining high in the sky, and noticing this, Lan Cheng covered his eyes with his hand, as the light was dazzling. He wondered how long it had been since they had seen the sun. Chao Lin remained calm. He was used to traveling for long periods without seeing sunlight. In front of them was a man wearing glasses and smoking a cigarette. With a serious expression, he began to write in his notepad and mentioned that their spaceship was parked at dock number 284, and that they could go pick it up with the receipt. Then, he told them to leave. Lan Cheng began to observe the man in silence. The man handed them a report, and Chao Lin stepped forward to take it, thanking him. With a furious expression, Lan Cheng asked Chao Lin if he had been kneeling for too long, reprimanding him for still thanking them after they had been locked up for so long. Chao Lin took the report and with a serene gaze mentioned that they had been treated very well and that, except for not having permission to communicate with the outside, everything else was of the highest standard. The image of him sleeping in a bed surrounded by women came to Chao Lin's mind, revealing that they gave him whatever he wanted, even women. Lan Cheng began to ponder in silence, and then he panicked, asking him what the hell he was talking about and if he had really enjoyed the best treatment while he was locked up. Chao Lin turned to him with a curious gaze and asked if the same hadn't happened to him. Lan Cheng began to show a nervous expression, not knowing what to say. Then, with a forced smile, he mentioned that yes, of course, him too. Lan Cheng couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly as he remembered being tied to a wall, screaming as a man with a steel bat approached to torture him. This was nothing more than the best treatment for a prisoner. To get information about Liu Shang out of him, they had used all sorts of tricks. He clenched his fist tightly, and his body began to tremble with rage. This matter wasn't over, and he would make sure to make it public when he returned. Chao Lin began to observe Lan Cheng in silence. He approached, extended his hand, and in a calm tone, asked him to forget it. He explained that the fact they had been released meant it was all over and that there was no point in dwelling on it anymore. Asking if it wasn't good enough to be alive, Lan Cheng snapped out of his thoughts. Then, he clenched his teeth and felt even more furious. He couldn't believe they were asking him to not make a big deal out of this. This was about a genius who was at least of the resplendent moon level. A super genius who even had the potential to reach the radiant sun level. He had been the first to discover him, and the people of the Yamu Star sector had just snatched him away like that. Chao Lin placed a hand on Lan Cheng's shoulder to try to calm him. With a sink-air expression, he asked him to try to look on the bright side, suggesting that maybe Liu Shang's talent wasn't as exceptional as they imagined, since, after all, the radiant sun level wasn't something that could be reached so easily. Lan Cheng calmed down a bit, thinking that Chao Lin was right. With his face covered in sweat, he mentioned that Chao Lin was saying it so lightly. He asked him if he knew how many years had to pass for just one like him to appear in their white mist sector. Just then, someone announced that the immortal level master was barely 20 years old, and that he was surprisingly young. Hearing this, Chao Lin and Lan Cheng couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Both grew curious, not knowing what was happening. With expressions full of curiosity and surprise, several men began to run, exclaiming that they wanted to see what that warrior looked like. Since he was immortal level, in a calm tone, Lan Cheng felt confused, not knowing what the people were saying or what this immortal level was. Chao Lin began to think in silence, then revealed that it was the legend of legends, a bloodline of terrifying power with a 1 in a trillion probability, which had only ever been born in the main star sector of Tianxi. Lan Cheng panicked, as it was the first time he had heard of a genius of this level. With a gaze full of surprise, Chao Lin recalled that the men had said that warrior was 20 years old. Lan Cheng's face broke out in a sweat. He was already getting an idea of who that warrior might be. While people were releasing balloons to celebrate, an airship began to cross the sky, announcing that they were celebrating with great joy the birth in the Yamu Star sector of a being with an immortal level transcendent physical constitution. A genius born only once every million years, the airship began to project a hologram. Everyone's attention was fixed on the sky, making them curious to see the legendary warrior. Lan Cheng's eyes widened in surprise, his jaw dropping in shock. The airship began to project a boy's hologram in the sky, and Lan Cheng panicked, shouting that Liu Sheng was the immortal level star genius. This is the end of the video. It was daytime, and in a beautiful crowded city somewhere on the planet, Lang was in the middle of the crowd, carrying a box with a stuffed animal and all his belongings. People's attention fixed on him. They wondered what was happening to Lang. They didn't understand why, in the prime of his life, he had decided to resign from his post just like that. The man with earrings placed a hand on his friend's shoulder and, with a serious gaze, began to whisper. He revealed that, due to his negligence in the line of duty, the White Mist Star sector had lost a martial arts genius with extremely exceptional talent. This had provoked the fury of the chief of law enforcement, Lunong. Hearing this, the elf-eared man's eyes widened in surprise, leaving him in shock. The friend felt somewhat confused, not knowing what kind of genius could make Lang, at the peak of level 11, lose his post. The man with earrings mentioned that apparently, the answer wasn't clear. While they were conversing, the only thing Lang could do was lower his head and walk quickly. Lang clenched his teeth tightly, and his eyes began to glow with rage. The only thing he could do was curse Lang under his breath. Consumed by rage, Lang gripped the box tightly and began to scream like a madman. He never would have thought that someone with such an honest appearance could be so malicious. While he admitted to being careless, he wondered if Lan Cheng didn't bear even 1% of the blame. His friend's attention fixed on him, realizing he was about to go crazy. Lang lowered his head and felt depressed. Not knowing what to do now, the others began to whisper among themselves, noting that his mood was changing every second. They wondered if he had already hit menopause, considering that, really, he should retire by now. Lang's face filled with sadness, letting out a sigh. He decided it was best to forget it. If he had to retire, so be it. Besides, he hadn't rested in a long time and would take this opportunity to take his wife and kids on vacation to the garden planet he had just bought. With a smile, Lang closed his eyes and his mouth began to water as he thought about what he had heard of the garden planet, a place with waterfalls of syrup, lakes of noodles with scallion oil, lamb skewers that sprouted from the ground, and trees full of draft beer fruits. Noticing this, the people felt somewhat confused and found it disgusting that he had become happy again. While Lang was lost in his thoughts, a hologram of Lunong appeared behind him. With eyes glowing with rage, he announced that he had an emergency announcement. Hearing Lunong's voice, Lang snapped out of his trance, his eyes widening with curiosity. Lunong stared at Lang, clenched his teeth, and with a furious gaze announced that the level 11 enforcer, Lang, due to negligence in the line of duty, had committed a grave and unforgivable error in his work. This had caused enormous and incalculable losses to the White Mist sector. The circumstances were severe, and his crime was unforgivable, for which the punishment was as follows: the lifelong revocation of his noble title, with his descendants forbidden from applying for noble status for 3 generations. His dismissal from the post of level 11 enforcer, and his banishment to the level 8 war planet to guard it for 3,000 years. Lang turned around and his eyes widened in fear, his body beginning to tremble in shock. Not long after, Lang dropped his box of belongings, letting it fall to the ground. Poor Lang fell to his knees, unable to stop himself from panicking. His mind was filled with questions. He didn't know why this was happening to him. Tears began to stream from his eyes like an endless river. He knew he was finished. He was lost. 3,000 years. And all for letting a single person escape. Consumed by despair, Lang collapsed to the ground, asking if his mistake was truly that serious. Meanwhile, somewhere else, someone was training with martial fire. It was none other than Lu Sheng. Our boy clenched his fist, and as his eyes shone with determination, martial fire began to emerge from his body. Lu Sheng delivered a powerful blow, shattering the stone wall to pieces. Then, he turned his back and, as he walked away, he mentally reviewed his rewards. An unlimited supply of all necessary resources for cultivation, an honorary Viscount title, a full set of level 11 weapons and equipment, and the latest private spaceship. Lu Sheng returned to his mansion, sat on his sofa, and as he wiped away his sweat, he began to drink a delicious shake. He reflected on what it felt like to be the sector's darling. It was incredibly cool to have all the resources of an entire sector dedicated solely to him. Lu Sheng opened the system window and with a serene gaze began to browse through it. Knowing that as long as it wasn't an overly excessive request, he could basically get anything he wanted. His eyes began to in with joy, a smile appearing on his face. Now he wouldn't have to worry at all about resources for cultivation. He thought that when he left the blue planet, his goal had been to work hard to save up and buy a couple of habitable planets. However, almost carelessly, he now owned an entire star system. The system began to display a list of planets. Lu Sheng observed it attentively and with a smile, and decided to choose several good habitable planets to assign one to each main province of the Dragon Nation. Lu Sheng chose a planet, put his hand under his chin, and his eyes began to shine. With a mischievous smile, he decided that as for the other countries, it would be enough for them to cram onto a single planet. Lu Sheng began to imagine Milton's scared witless, apologizing and begging for his life. With a serene gaze, Lu Sheng thought that now, if he wanted to teach Milton a lesson, he wouldn't need to beat around the bush anymore. He could stand right in front of his father and give him a couple of good slaps. And his father would probably even applaud and congratulate him on how well he had slapped him. Lu Sheng put his arms behind his head and wondered what his parents' reaction would be when they heard this news. At that moment, a woman with sensual legs began to walk towards him. It was an elf-eared woman carrying a folder with reports. She entered our boy's room and with a kind smile informed him that the planetary class ships he had requested were all now in position. Hearing her voice, Lu Sheng snapped out of his trance, his eyes widening in surprise. Our boy stood up and with a calm smile, asked her to take him for a look. As he was quite curious about ships capable of housing the people of an entire planet. With a nervous expression, she adjusted a lock of her hair, began to look at the floor, and informed him that there was a snag. The ships couldn't depart yet, because this area belonged to the White Mist sector, and they were looking for a way to solve the problem. Lu Sheng put his hand under his chin, his eyes widening in confusion, puzzled that the area belonged to the White Mist sector. At that moment, our boy's phone started to ring. When he turned it on, he saw he had a video call from Snowy, his fiancée. In a worried tone, she asked him if Lu Sheng grew curious and asked her what was wrong. Snowy's eyes began to fill with sadness. She looked down at the ground and revealed that the blue planet seemed to be in serious trouble. Lu Sheng was shocked, not knowing what was happening. Lu Sheng's mother and father were with Snowy, their expressions full of worry. The mother asked Qin Shui if she had finished talking with little Sheng and if he had said when he would be back, as he had already been away for several months. The father, who was smoking, crossed his arms and began to ponder in silence. With a stern expression, he told his wife she was being silly. He reminded her that their son had gone into the universe and asked if she even knew how big it was, explaining that this wasn't like going to the corner market, a 10-minute round trip. He insisted that it wasn't that easy and that she should stop worrying over nothing. The mother's attention fixed on him, her eyes widening in surprise. The mother thought that he was right. She decided to go prepare a meal, hoping that little Sheng could return soon. With a kind smile, Snowy assured the mother that she shouldn't worry. She explained that Lu Sheng was doing wonderfully in the universe, and they even said he had become a count, so there was no reason for concern. As Snowy's eyes shone with tranquility, she turned to the father and with a smile, said she was going out for a walk. With a smile, the father nodded. Not long after, Snowy left the mansion and began to look at the ground with a lost expression. While she was distracted, a purple-haired woman appeared in front of her, catching her attention. Hearing her voice, Snowy raised her head, her eyes widening in surprise and curiosity. This woman was Lin Zhengyu, who extended her hand, greeted her as Mrs. Lu, and asked what Lu Sheng had said. Snowy observed her and, in a sincere tone, admitted that he would return as soon as he could, and that he would also help them solve this problem through other channels. Lin Zhengyu clenched her fist, her eyes filling with confusion. She didn't know what she meant by other channels. Snowy remained calm, revealing that she wasn't sure of the details, as he didn't go into specifics. He just told them not to worry. Lin Zhengyu lamented that, in the end, their power was too weak, as a planet from a low-level civilization. They only qualified to be exploited and oppressed. Her eyes began to shine with sadness and fear. She explained that the previous guide, named Lan Cheng, had been quite reasonable, but he had suddenly been replaced by a new one. Even though they had just collected the resources, W1 now wanted them to deliver them again, and the quota was hundreds of times higher than the last. She was sure he was just trying to line his own pockets. With a gaze full of curiosity and confusion, Snowy wondered if, judging by the situation, they couldn't gather enough. Lin Zhengyu began to ponder in silence. Then her eyes began to shine with seriousness. She stated that it was like trying to shear enough wool for an entire clothing factory from a single sheep. It was a completely impossible task. Not even by paying out of their own pockets could they gather half. Then, she closed her eyes, accepting the unfair reality that the weak get bullied, and the skinny horse gets ridden. Snowy's eyes widened with serenity. She believed that when Liu Sheng returned, everything would be resolved without a problem. Lin Zhengyu clenched her fist, admitting that she actually preferred not to have to rely on Liu Sheng's power to solve this problem, but they had been pushed to the point of having no other choice. She began to imagine hundreds of spaceships ready to invade the blue planet. Her eyes started to shine with fear, knowing that with Liu Sheng's temperament, he would surely confront that guide upon his return. And while dealing with a single guide was easy, she feared that next time he would come with an entire star fleet behind him. The image of Liu Sheng came to her mind. She was sincere and admitted that Liu Sheng's talent and genius in martial arts were astonishing. Without a doubt, he had an immense future ahead of him. If because of them, he provoked a powerful enemy and this hindered his martial path, then the inhabitants of the blue planet would be guilty of a crime that not even dying 10,000 times could atone for. Snowy stood listening in silence without interrupting. She placed a hand over her chest, and her eyes filled with sadness, admitting that she didn't really know how to describe Liu Sheng's current situation in the universe either. She only knew something about him being a count and that he had just bought a spaceship to pick them up, but she didn't quite understand what level all of this represented. She lifted her head and began to recall the video call she had with Liu Sheng. With a kind and confident smile, Liu Sheng had assured her that he had the power to solve it and that they should wait for him to return. Meanwhile, Liu Sheng met with Sebastian and Ecclesia. While they conversed, Sebastian was sitting and drinking a glass of wine. Liu Sheng turned to them and, as his eyes shone with tranquility, he told them more or less what the situation was. Calmly, Sebastian took a sip of his wine. Liu Sheng's gaze fixed on him, his eyes widening with seriousness. Now that he thought about it, he felt a little embarrassed. The chairman was in charge of countless planets of all sizes, and here he was, asking him to personally help resolve such an insignificant matter. To him, this was like someone having a chicken stolen from their yard and going directly to the emperor for justice, and to top it all off, the emperor of another country. Liu Sheng turned to Ecclesia and asked the Chief of Justice how they could resolve this situation, admitting that he didn't know who else to turn to and asking if she had any solution. Hearing our boy's voice, she snapped out of her trance, feeling somewhat surprised and not knowing what to say. She placed her hand under her chin and with a calm expression mentioned that the blue star was, in the end, a resource planet subordinate to the white mist star zone, so the forces of the Yamu star zone couldn't intervene directly. However, this was easy to handle. She just needed to contact some star nobles close to his home star system. She extended her hand, assuring him that with the influence of these nobles, resolving a small problem from the resource department wouldn't be difficult at all. She informed him that she would arrange it immediately and that there was no need to rush. Liu Sheng thanked her. As Ecclesia's eyes were shining with love, she placed her hand on her chest. She told him that this was a minor matter and that, actually, she also had something she needed to bother him with. Hearing this, with a curious smile, Liu Sheng extended his hand, curious to hear it. Liu Sheng placed his hand over his chest and with a sincere expression, promised her that if it was something he could do, he would certainly do his best. Ecclesia began to ponder in silence. Knowing that Liu Sheng was someone to be trusted, Liu Sheng placed his hand under his chin and sank into his thoughts. The Yamu Star sector had done a lot for him lately. The Whitehole Explorer ship alone was worth several billion black crystal coins, and that was just the cost of materials, not the selling price. As for the other cultivation resources, they were countless. He had taken so much that he felt ashamed. His eyes began to shine with seriousness. This time, they had even helped solve the problems at his home. And he really wouldn't feel at ease if he didn't do something in return for the Yamu Star sector. With a kind smile, Sebastian extended his hand and asked our boy if he was interested in joining a combat competition and skill exchange with geniuses from other star sectors to improve martial prowess. Hearing this, Liu Sheng snapped out of his thoughts, his eyes widening with curiosity and confusion, and asked for the specific details. With a serious gaze, Sebastian stood up, began to point his finger at Liu Sheng, and clarified that in the name of the Yamu Star sector, they would join with the 13 surrounding star sectors to launch a grand-scale, inter-sector, star-level martial genius exchange tournament. Sebastian began to raise his hand in the air, and not long after, a hologram of the entire universe appeared. In a calm tone, he explained to Liu Sheng that when the time came, they would gather every super genius from the 13 star sectors, hailing from every civilization and race. Liu Sheng's attention was fixed on the hologram, and he sank into his thoughts. Sebastian's eyes began to shine with determination, a smile appearing on his face as he revealed that they would be his sparring partners. Liu Sheng couldn't help but smile, knowing this was the grand stage of the stars, a place where all races would compete for supremacy and prodigies would clash. The mere idea of being able to pinch the little heads of those star-level geniuses from different sectors and species ridiculously excited him. After giving it some thought, Liu Sheng approached Sebastian and, with a calm expression, mentioned that he accepted to participate in the tournament and asked when it would begin. Sebastian began to stroke his beard, closed his eyes, and asked Liu Sheng not to be hasty. He explained that, for now, this was just an idea of his. He still had to ask if the other star domains agreed. And the exact list of participants was still under discussion. Sebastian tapped Liu Sheng on the chest, causing his eyes to widen in surprise. Sebastian began to stare intently at Liu Sheng and made it clear that he was the key, and that the only thing he needed to do right now was to continue cultivating, and become stronger. Ecclesia approached and interrupted them, explaining to Liu Sheng that although an immortal grade bloodline was powerful, his current strength level was still a bit low. She crossed her arms and her eyes began to shine with seriousness. She explained that the other star domains surely didn't have immortal grade geniuses, but that across a dozen of them, there would be at a minimum, some at the glimmer moon and sunlight levels. 12th level powerhouses would not participate, but there would definitely be no shortage of 11th level ones. Sebastian, who had his arms behind his back, admitted that she was right, but warned Liu Sheng not to get carried away by the excitement. Although the goal was to bring people to be his sparring partners, winning or the rankings didn't really matter. In any case, his future prospects were tens of thousands of times wider than all of theirs combined. Liu Sheng listened in silence without interrupting. Sebastian closed his eyes and let out a sigh. Then his body began to release an intense and powerful green martial energy. He still hoped that this unprecedented tournament of top geniuses among the star sectors would be a demonstration of power, showcasing the value of immortal-grade bloodlines and elevating the prestige of their Yamu star sector. Liu Sheng began to gaze toward the ground, and an excited smile spread across his face. His eyes began to shine with confidence, and he asked Sebastian if all the opponents would be solely 11th level. He declared that this was not enough and that, at a minimum, they should bring more 12th level martial arts prodigies. Otherwise, the pressure would be too small. Hearing this, Sebastian's and Ecclesia's eyes widened in surprise, and their jaws dropped in shock. At the same time, on the blue planet, on some island near the sea, it was daytime, and seagulls were soaring through the sky. Not far away, there was a group of women in bikinis enjoying a beautiful day at the beach, and behind them was a guy with glasses drinking coconut water. After taking a sip, he activated his watch and with a smile, asked Mars to guess how much profit he had made this time. The watch began to project a hologram of a man with elf ears, who with a confused gaze mentioned that he didn't know. A confident smile spread across the fat guy's face, and, holding up a finger, he revealed that it was 100,000, at least 100,000, and in black crystal coins. Hearing this, Ma's eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped in shock. He couldn't believe that he wasn't joking and that a profit of this kind was actually possible. The fat guy lay back in the hammock and began to laugh heartily. He explained that Mars had no idea how rich this low-level resource planet really was. His predecessor had been a fool, because every time he came to collect resources, he took exactly the amount the boss ordered him to, making him a complete idiot in his eyes. He set the coconut on the table and with an arrogant expression mentioned that this was a good thing, since if Lan Cheng hadn't been stupid, it wouldn't have benefited him anyway. The fat guy relaxed, knowing that by just coming here a few more times, it wouldn't take him long to save up enough to buy a house, a spaceship, and even pay the dowry to marry Marina. The fat guy started laughing like crazy. The gifts he had given in the past certainly weren't in vain, as they had transferred him to the resource department all at once. The perks were truly extraordinary. He made back the money he spent on the gifts in a single trip. Mars started staring at the fat guy and couldn't help but feel envious. Working at the lowest levels was tough, while the fat guy received the best treatment and service on every resource planet. He also got to enjoy the scenery of different planets, not to mention the beauties and gourmet food. Mars' eyes began to shine with rage, causing him to clench his fists tightly. He exclaimed that the fat guy had it made and that he also wanted to be transferred to the resource department. With a confident smile, the fat guy explained that he couldn't look at it that way, since some places were full of perks, while others were so barren that not even birds would shit there. The map of the blue planet came to his mind as he explained that, for example, his current location, Blue Planet A28462, seemed ordinary and its martial civilization had only begun 300 years ago. However, no one would have thought that their exploration of the planet's Tawane energy crystal deposits had reached 90%. This planet alone had brought him nearly 10,000 black crystal coins. Mars closed his eyes and crossed his arms. He considered this outrageous and warned him to be careful, since such a rich production of energy crystals must mean the presence of many martial powerhouses. According to him, the people from lower civilizations were all brutes, and if he provoked them, they might team up to slaughter him. While Mars was speaking, the fat guy just smiled, mentioning that he was more cautious than him and that he had investigated it a long time ago. The highest level on the blue planet was only 9. And there were fewer than 100 of them. As for the civilization's heritage, the fat guy started watching two women playing in the sea. As for the civilization's heritage, it seemed quite strange to him. The foundational martial heritage looked quite advanced, but the top tier one was terribly behind. The fat guy started to imagine Liu Sheng surrounded by intense martial energy. And Mars revealed that this seemed to be because a genius called the God of War had appeared on this planet and had already left for the stars. He supposed that those high-level heritages at the lower levels were bought from the outside and spread there. After all, low-level material was cheap. Mars's eyes began to shine with seriousness as he warned him that geniuses from native civilizations capable of leaving their planet weren't simple. And that he should watch his step or he'd trigger a trap. The fat guy couldn't help but smile. He gestured dismissively and asked with disdain if Mars really thought he should be afraid of them. He explained that this planet hadn't even been approved for a level 10 martial license, which meant it had never produced a warrior above level 10. He claimed that they could bring him as many level 9 warriors as they wanted. He would take them all on. While the fat guy was sunbathing, Mars decided to tell him that if that was the case, he should do as he pleased, and added that something big had happened recently in the core star sector. Mars clenched his fist tightly and with a gaze full of seriousness revealed that in the neighboring Yamu star sector, a supergenius with a transcendent, immortal-grade physique had appeared. Something that had sent shockwaves through every star sector. Hearing this, the fat guy first adjusted his glasses, then his eyes widened in surprise and fear, leaving him in shock. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. An immortal grade was something he had always considered a mere legend. Mars put a hand to his face, let out a sigh, and told the fat guy to just look it up for himself. The fat guy's attention was fixed on him, his mind filled with curiosity. Mars spread his hands and decided to tell the inside story, explaining that the genius was originally from their white mist star zone. But due to the negligence of a certain enforcer, the Yamu star zone had secretly snatched him away. As a consequence, that enforcer ended up being exiled to the Warfield star for 3,000 years. After many explanations, the fat guy placed his hand under his chin and couldn't help but smile, realizing that all of this had actually happened and that the Yamu star zone had some very cunning methods. Mars began to imagine several high-ranking nobles and explained that, right now, the nobles of the core star zone were searching for talent like crazy on the low-level civilized worlds of their own domains, and that this had become a genuine trend. With his face covered in sweat, Mars started pointing his finger at him and decided to remind him not to overstep his bounds on the low-level resource planets. Otherwise, if he provoked some monstrous prodigy, he wouldn't be able to handle the consequences. With a nervous expression, the fat guy started waving his hand, promising that he would never cross someone so important, since he was in star cluster number 2837, basically the suburbs of the suburbs. At that moment, Mars' watch began to beep and with a nervous expression, he revealed that, apparently, that genius had been found right in their star cluster. Hearing this, the fat guy took off his glasses, his eyes widening in fear, wondering if Mars was playing a joke on him. With a furious gaze, the fat guy accused him of being an alarmist. He claimed that even if the genius really was in cluster 2837, there were tens of millions of life-bearing planets there, making the probability 1 in 100 million. He was so sure he wouldn't run into him that he swore that if he did, he would do a handstand and have diarrhea on the spot, and then drink it all up. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Mars's eyes began to shine with confusion as he noticed the fat guy wanted to try and freeload once more. Mars's hologram started to disappear. But not before joking about his greasy face from all the food and reminding him that he owed him a big dinner upon his return. The fat guy took off his glasses and began to ponder in silence. Not knowing what was going to happen now, the fat guy took out his mobile phone and his eyes widened in confusion. He didn't know if an immortal level warrior truly existed. He opened a news article about Liu Sheng and began to read attentively about the first prodigy from District 13 in a million years. He placed his hand under his chin and his face became covered in sweat as he realized that this prodigy was actually close to him, something that seemed absolutely impossible. He lay down in the hammock again and with a calm expression, took another sip of the coconut water. Convincing himself that it was impossible to have such bad luck and that he was just worrying for nothing. His worries vanished and a smile spread across his face as he remembered that less than 2 days remained until the deadline he had given them. Faced with the silence from those guys, he decided it was time to send them a reminder. Not long after, the fat guy gathered momentum and leapt. With an arrogant gaze, using his martial power, he began to fly, creating a large explosion on the ground. In the blink of an eye, the new guide arrived where Cumberland was. The powerful guide landed behind him and upon noticing this, poor Cumberland's eyes widened with surprise and fear. Cumberland turned around, placed his hand over his chest, and paid his respects to the guide. The fat guy began to walk towards him in silence, lost in his thoughts. With a worried expression, Cumberland raised his head and at that moment, the martial saints from the blue planet began to descend from the sky behind him, apologizing for being late. Now that everyone had arrived, Cumberland and the martial saints prostrated themselves before the fat guy to pay their respects. With an arrogant expression, the fat guy got straight to the point and asked how the task he had assigned them was going. Upon hearing this, Cumberland's eyes began to gleam with fear and terror, making him sweat like crazy. Without wasting any more time, he raised his hand and several cubes filled with bright, high-purity energy crystals began to descend from the sky. Cumberland was nervous, not knowing if this amount was enough. The fat guy adjusted his glasses and began to silently observe the energy crystals. Far from being satisfied, with a furious expression, he kicked the cube of energy crystals. He couldn't believe they presented him with so little, questioning if this was the result of all their preparations or if they were simply mocking him. The guide clenched his fists and a powerful, intense martial energy began to emerge from his body, outraged that they would try to dismiss him as if he were a beggar under the starry sky. The guide was so powerful that he caused the sky to cloud over and a mighty thunder to appear. The martial saints' attention was fixed on it and their jaws dropped in fear. Without wasting another second, they prostrated themselves before the fat guy again, imploring him to calm his anger. At that moment, a woman stepped forward, asking the guide to wait a moment. Noticing this, one of them fixed his attention on his eyes widened in surprise and confusion. It was none other than Zheng Yu. With a calm expression, she began to walk towards the guide, explaining that their blue star was only a level 1 resource planet and that, because of this, they really couldn't produce that much. Far from feeling scared or intimidated, her eyes began to shine with confidence. She mentioned that, in addition, they had previously delivered a batch of energy crystals that exceeded the quota. The fat guy put his hands on his waist and began to think in silence. Zheng Yu approached him, bowed her head as a sign of respect, and begged him to be understanding. With a cold smile, the guide scoffed, asking rhetorically who would understand him if he were to be understanding. Zheng Yu began to stare at the guide in silence, not knowing what to say. The fat guy noticed that this woman was a die-hard fan of that god of war and a real troublemaker, the very one who had complained the most when he increased the quota 300-fold. The fat guy's eyes began to gleam with malice and a smile spread across his face. He decided to start with her. Night had already fallen and under the starry sky, the fat guy leapt. Upon noticing this, Zheng Yu panicked, knowing that this was not good. The fat guy landed in front of her and with an arrogant smile, he grabbed her by the neck and lifted her off the ground. As a powerful martial energy emerged from the power difference was overwhelming. The only thing Zheng Yu could do was grab the guide's arm to make him let go. Her eyes widened in fear and her body began to tremble. The fat guy started to stare at her and with a cold expression questioned if she liked being the one who always took the initiative. The guide gripped Zheng Yu's neck tightly and began to fly. Everyone's attention was fixed on him, causing them to panic and plead for mercy. With a furious gaze, the guide turned towards them, asking if they also wished to die. Cumberland's and the others' eyes widened in fear. They began to look at each other, not knowing what to do. If they intervened, they would die too. The guide's patience ran out. With an expression full of rage, he warned them that he would give them 5 more days, and if after that time they still couldn't gather the quota of energy crystals he needed, there would be consequences. Then, he gripped poor Zheng Yu's neck even more tightly, making her grit her teeth in pain. The guide began to imbue his martial power into her body, causing her to open her mouth and start screaming in agony. With an arrogant gaze, the fat guy made it clear that they should be ready to end up like her. Just before the guide could kill Zheng Yu, someone asked him to stop, and not long after, a slash of energy cut the arrogant guide's arm, making his eyes widen in surprise and fear, not knowing what was happening. The fat guy grabbed his arm and began to scream like a madman, releasing Zheng Yu. She placed her hand on her neck and couldn't help but feel relieved and confused. As blood gushed from his arm like a river, he clenched his fist tightly and his eyes began to gleam with rage, furiously demanding to know who had dared to attack him. When the guide turned around, he saw there was a giant spaceship near them, leaving him somewhat confused. Not long after, hundreds of fleets began to descend from the sky. The guide's eyes widened in fear and surprise, wondering what was happening and if the presence of so many fleets meant the arrival of some great figure from the cosmos who had just ordered him to stop. The ships bore a black dragon emblem, and upon observing carefully, the fat guy remembered that it was the black dragon emblem, the coat of arms of the Black Dragon Mountain family. His body began to tremble like a chicken's and his mind was flooded with fear as he recognized Black Dragon Mountain as one of the highest powers in the White Mist region. He didn't understand why so many of their fleets would suddenly appear here. This was like a top-tier noble suddenly showing up at a country shack. Someone inside the spaceship ordered the fat guy to kneel. The guide snapped out of his thoughts and his attention fixed on the command, leaving him somewhat confused. The fat guy refused, but a strange pressure forced his body to kneel without resistance. He was in shock, wondering what this pressure was. The fat guy slammed his own head hard against the ground, causing his sunglasses to shatter into pieces. He didn't know what was happening. Someone landed in front of the fat guy and asked if he was the new guide in charge of resource collection for Blue Star number 828462. The fat guy lifted his head and his eyes widened with curiosity. The powerful Count of Black Dragon Mountain, Luo Feng, who was wielding a spear, began to stare at the fat guy with a piercing gaze as he walked towards him. The guide's arrogant expression changed. He placed his hand over his chest and with a sincere expression, he nodded. Luo Feng's eyes began to gleam with rage upon confirming there was no mistake. He introduced himself as Luo Feng, Count of Black Dragon Mountain, and sentenced that the guide had abused his power for his own benefit, lining his pockets, and had even dared to act arrogantly on the home star of an immortal count. He declared that not even 1,000 deaths would be enough to redeem his sin. The fat guy got nervous and started sweating like crazy. In his panic, he tried to explain to Count Luo Feng that it was all a misunderstanding. He admitted to having abused his power for his own benefit, but he flatly denied having acted arrogantly on the home star of an immortal count, swearing that he would never have dared to do so, as he only believed he was taking advantage of an insignificant and rundown resource planet. Luo Feng observed him in silence, not entirely sure if the fat guy was telling the truth, but then, with a furious expression, he questioned how this could be a misunderstanding, and was outraged that he still dared to claim that he was mistaken. The fat guy's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. Not understanding how this was happening, Luo Feng stood in front of him. Panic seized the guide. He found it impossible to believe that this insignificant blue star was actually the home star of that immortal count. Not even a level 10 individual had ever been born on this planet. So he couldn't comprehend how an immortal level genius could possibly emerge from here. Luo Feng didn't say a single word. The guide's eyes filled with tears. He begged him to investigate the matter thoroughly, insisting that there must be some mistake. The sky was filled with spaceships. Luo Feng stared down at the guide, telling him to raise his head and look, as the counts from the Bai Kehua family, the Gardena Star Magic Lion family, the Ode family, and all the famous families had come. Then, his eyes began to shine with confidence and rage, arguing that while he alone might be mistaken, it was impossible for all the people who had come to also be wrong. The fat guy's face contorted in fear and his mind was filled with questions. He didn't know how this could be happening. The guide began to picture Luo Feng smiling, and then he slammed his head hard against the ground, wondering what kind of amazing, heaven-shaking figure that immortal count must be. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Luo Feng unsheathed his spear and held it to the guide's head. Just then, a woman in high heels descended from another spaceship, approached them, and stepped on the fat guy's head, making his eyes widen in fear and causing him to sweat like crazy. He knew, better than anyone, that he was in serious trouble. The elf-eared woman crossed her arms and stared down at the guide. With a curious gaze, she asked Luo Feng if this guy had also come to get some benefit from the immortal level genius's homeworld. Luo Feng nodded, with a serious expression. He asked her to restrain him and interrogate him harshly. They needed to find out if he had done anything else out of line on this planet, so they would have an explanation when the immortal genius returned. The woman pondered in silence, and just then, more nobles began to descend from their ships and land near them. Luo Feng and the woman turned around, and their eyes began to shine with seriousness. While the woman was stepping on the guide's head, a noble began to walk towards them and, with a smile, spread his hands, commenting that they actually had to thank this guy too, for if it weren't for an unlucky fool like him, unable to see reality, they wouldn't have had such a magnificent opportunity to meet the immortal genius. With a wicked smile, the man suggested using the guide as a sacrificial banner. The other nobles nodded, knowing it was a good idea. With a smile, Luo Feng also nodded. This was an immortal grade bloodline, although he was only at level 9 right now. With time, it was entirely possible that the genius could leave this star sector, and even this galaxy. The woman placed her hand under her chin, and her eyes began to shine with excitement. She realized that, by then, he might no longer be an immortal genius, he would become an immortal marquis, a duke, or even an immortal king. As the woman continued to step on the guide's head, Luo Feng couldn't help but feel frustrated, as it was a real shame that Lu Sheng wasn't from their White Mist Star sector. Luo Feng let out a sigh, and his eyes began to shine with determination. Since despite everything, having Speaker Zheng Luopu pulling some strings to help them establish good connections was a stroke of luck. The guide's face was covered in sweat and his mind was flooded with fear, better than anyone. He knew he had to do something. The fat guy's eyes widened in panic and tears began to stream from them like an endless river, as he wondered in horror if he had truly siphoned profits from the immortal count's very own homeworld. The fat guy was in shock, as he couldn't believe that the 1 in a billion chance of this happening had fallen to him. The sun was setting, and the woman continued to step on the arrogant guide's head. The only thing the fat guy could do was feel frustrated, wondering why the hell he had joined the resources department. He thought it would have been much better to simply buy a star lottery ticket and sit at home waiting for the jackpot. Poor Zheng Yu slowly began to regain consciousness. With an expression full of fear, she started to cough and open her eyes. The woman pressed down even harder on the guide's head, ordering him to kneel properly. When Zheng Yu lifted her head, her mind was filled with confusion. She didn't know what was happening. Luofeng turned around and with a serene expression, began to walk towards her in silence. Luofeng was a true gentleman. He helped Zheng Yu to her feet and asked if she was all right, as he knew she had been through a lot. With a smile, she replied that she felt much better now and thanked him for his help. While Luofeng's eyes shone with serenity, he took out a small green vial and removed its cap, causing drops to begin falling toward the ground. Zheng Yu's attention was fixed on it, and her eyes widened in surprise as she noticed the powerful aura. The drops hit the ground, and not long after, grass sprouted from nothing. A smile appeared on Luofeng's face, and Zheng Yu's jaw dropped in shock. She didn't know what was happening. Observing carefully, she realized that it had revitalized the entire land in an instant. Her eyes widened in surprise as she felt a strange sensation. She placed her hand over her chest, feeling a wave of relief as a warm power enveloped her. Her wounds had been cleansed by the vitality radiating from the land, and it felt incredibly comforting. Holding up the potion with a kind smile, Luofeng explained that he didn't have any below level 11. This mystic purple potion could heal, but it had to be diluted 100 million times before it could be consumed. So he had no choice but to pour it onto this land to nourish the planet. All Zheng Yu could do was stare in silence. Luofeng offered her the potion, arguing that if she could be healed from even the slightest core radiation and even greatly increase her strength, then the immortal Count's homeworld couldn't. So barren. Zheng Yu's mind was filled with questions. She didn't know what to do. With a grateful expression, she bowed her head to Luofeng, thanking his lordship for saving her life. She looked down at the ground and couldn't help but blush, thinking that this was too valuable. She realized that a single vial of the potion could evolve the entire blue star. She had only suffered a slight impact to her soul and would be fine after some rest. This kind of healing potion could be worth more than the entire planet. She placed her hand on her chest and stopped bowing to Luofeng. She was red as a tomato and paying close attention. She realized her strength had greatly increased because of it. She closed her eyes and let out a sigh, thinking about the bitter days when she painstakingly gathered energy crystals to exchange for a guide's leftovers. Now, however, just by basking in the radiance of a high-level life form, she could grow stronger just like that. This was truly astounding. The elf-eared woman kicked the fat guy in the rear, ordering him to behave and move. The guide's demeanor changed instantly. He was like a dog now. Zheng Yu's attention fixed on them, and she was stunned. It was no wonder that even a level 10 guide was like an ant in their eyes, something they could crush with the flick of a finger. With a surprised gaze, she approached Luofeng and asked who the immortal Earl he had just mentioned was. Luofeng's attention turned to her. With a smile, he mentioned that he had forgotten she knew nothing about the immortal Earl. Luofeng revealed that the immortal Earl was the one who had left this blue planet. Zheng Yu began to picture Lu Sheng smiling, and her eyes widened in surprise, leaving her in utter shock. Luofeng knew that she called him the god of war. He explained that Earl Lu Sheng possessed the most powerful immortal class extraordinary physique ever seen in both the White Mist sector and the Yamu sector, being hailed as the greatest genius of their 13 sectors in a million years. Therefore, the Yamu Star Sector Federation conferred upon him the title of Immortal. The eyes of the nearby martial saints widened in surprise. One of them began to point at Luofeng, urging the others to listen, as they had just said they were sent by Lord Lu's faction. The martial saints began to converse among themselves. They were stunned that Lord Lu had left Blue Star only a few months ago, and, in the blink of an eye, had already become one of the most important figures in the entire cosmos. The first true prodigy in a million years. Heavens, this was incredible. Zheng Yu began to recall what Snowy had mentioned. It seemed Luofeng was doing more or less okay out there. Closing her eyes, she felt joyful, as she remembered asking Mrs. Lu previously. And she had told her that he was barely managing out there in the stars. Her eyes filled with relief and she adjusted a lock of her hair, as she finally understood what the expression, more or less, meant. At the same time, somewhere else, the ship White Bird was en route to Blue Star. Inside the ship, Luofeng was focused, meditating in silence. Luofeng began to gaze toward the ground and his body started to emit an intense energy. Without wasting a second, Luofeng clenched his fist tightly and emerged from the spaceship. While his eyes were shining with tranquility, he began to concentrate his martial energy into his fist. In front of Luofeng was a void. Without wasting a second, Luofeng struck hard. His power caused the void to slowly begin to close and collapse. Our boy, with his fist clenched, began to observe attentively and felt joyful upon noticing that this power could even collapse the void. Although they were clearly of the same level of martial heritage, he wondered why this one was much stronger than the wind martial Dao he had inherited from Salus last time. His eyes began to shine with curiosity, as he thought that perhaps this was due to the Starfall Fate Disc. He remembered that during that trial, a massive wave of power had entered his body from the starry sky at the end, causing his strength to skyrocket. His expression turned serious, as he could now even feel the blue planet from light years away. His perception had also increased significantly. Luofeng concentrated, causing an intense yet powerful energy to begin to surge from his body. His mentor's Dao of the Four Extremes was truly marvelous. The inheritance he had just received allowed him to reach level 5 in his palm techniques, while his boxing, sword techniques, spear techniques, axe techniques, and body techniques were approaching the peak of this same level. Luofeng took out his mobile phone and turned it on. With an ironic look, he remembered that he had been told they would contact someone to solve the problem, and he wanted to see if it was already resolved. He made a video call to Snowy, who, with a smile, asked Luofeng if he was innerly returning. With a kind smile, he explained to his wife that yes, but that he still had half a day of travel left, and he asked her if everything was finished. With a nervous expression, she told him yes, it was resolved, only it had been a bit noisy. His eyes widened in confusion and curiosity, wondering just how noisy it could be. His wife said he would find out when he got back. Half a day later, Luofeng approached the blue planet, and his eyes filled with surprise, leaving him in shock. There were hundreds of enormous spaceships near the blue planet. He couldn't believe she could call this a bit noisy. This was too much. Placing his hands on the table, Luofeng stood up, his gaze fixed on the spaceships, wondering how many people the counselor had found to help him and if the situation had really been that serious. At that moment, someone asked if he was the immortal Earl. His eyes filled with confusion, and he confirmed that he was. Hundreds of ships lined up in front of Luofeng's, and one of them projected a message welcoming the immortal Earl on his return to his home planet. Luofeng was in shock. He realized this was a grand spectacle, and that now, without a doubt, he owed a huge favor. This is the end of the video. If you want to see the next part, then subscribe to our channel. It was daytime, and several hours later, Lu Sheng landed and all the star nobles surrounded him to greet him with respect. Our boy was in shock and his eyes widened in surprise, making him feel nervous as he recognized this scene. Enthusiastically, the star nobles began to surround Lu Sheng. Everyone was in awe. Luo Feng, from the Black Dragon Mountain family of the White Mist Starfield, paid his respects to His Excellency, the Undying Earl. Lu Sheng remained silent, not knowing what to do. With a kind smile, the brown-haired man introduced himself as a member of the White Sparrow Flower family. The red-haired noble placed a hand on his chest and with a pleasant expression introduced himself as being from the Gardener Starry Sky Demon Lion family. Seeing so many powerful nobles, the only thing Lu Sheng could do was show a nervous smile and greet everyone. His eyes filled with confusion and curiosity, wondering how many people they had mobilized and if they had perhaps sent an entire fleet of star destroyers. The image of the crying fat guide came to his mind. Lu Sheng guessed that the guide never imagined, not even in his wildest dreams, that secretly taking a couple of sips of blood would make him the target of dozens of cannons at once. With a grateful gaze, Lu Sheng extended his hand and thanked everyone for coming from so far away to help his homeworld. Luo Feng approached Lu Sheng, placed his hand on his chest, and bowed his head before him as a sign of respect. He stated that it was the immortal Count who honored them, explaining that since he was considered one of their own in the White Mist sector, this trivial matter was not worthy of mention. Lu Sheng turned towards him and silently observed him with a smile. Luo Feng crossed his arms and began to contemplate the powerful immortal Count. The red-haired woman also appeared to greet Lu Sheng, and with a kind smile, she mentioned that she agreed with Count Luo Feng. Furthermore, she added that a federal parasite who abused power for personal gain and deceived superiors and subordinates alike deserved to be executed by everyone. She placed a hand on her chest and with a determined expression, added that it wasn't even necessary to mention that he had foolishly provoked the immortal Count's homeworld. She stated that, even if he had harmed any other planet, it would have been their duty to act anyway. A smile spread across our boy's face, and he invited them to stay a little longer, assuring them that he would thank them properly for their help. Luo Feng placed a hand on his chest, bowed his head before Lu Sheng, and explained that the timing was perfect. The 10 billion vials of gene optimization fluid he had ordered for the immortal Count's homeworld would still take some time to arrive, so he would brazenly stay for a few more days. He stated that he would only feel at ease once the merchandise arrived, and he had confirmed that everything was in order. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's eyes filled with surprise and confusion, making him feel somewhat curious. The elf-eared woman's eyes began to shine with seriousness as she pictured several powerful warriors. She explained that this was a small gift from all of them. She supposed it wouldn't be long before he was granted a fiefdom among the stars, and his people from his home world could serve as the first group of residents and help govern other territories in the future. The problem was that they were a bit weak in terms of strength. For this reason, they had ordered a large quantity of gene optimization serum. She clarified that it was nothing special, but it could raise the maximum potential of common people with no martial foundation to a theoretical level 7. Lu Sheng sank into his thoughts, while on the other side, Zheng Yu clenched her fist and her eyes widened in surprise. She couldn't believe that everyone could reach level 7. With a confident smile, Luo Feng stepped forward and affirmed that it was so. He explained that with the addition of his level 12 elixir that nourished the land, it wouldn't be long before Blue Star fully entered an era where everyone would be like a dragon. The eyes of all the martial saints and warriors of the Blue Planet began to shine with joy and excitement. Understanding that this meant they would ascend to the top in a single step, enjoying the glory of the war god. Lu Sheng observed them in silence, feeling somewhat bewildered. He didn't expect that all the common people could directly reach level 7. This was the weight that came with the term advanced civilization. Then, a proud smile formed on his face. This really wasn't bad at all. His family's lifespan could also be extended by several hundred years. He had planned to slowly terraform the Blue Planet, but now this had been completed in a single step. With a confident smile, one of the nobles began to look at Lu Sheng and mentioned that, assuming the immortal El would want to take his people from his home world with him in the future once he established his territory, he would need to make preparations. For this reason, he would gift the immortal Earl 1000 explorer-class ships. Upon hearing this, everyone's attention fixed on the noble, leaving them somewhat confused. Lu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Not long after, an excited smile appeared on his face. He recognized this as another great gift. Although they were only upper mid-range ships, they weren't something ordinary people could buy, and they were handing him 1,000 at once. Then, he thanked the noble. Seeing this, The brown-haired fat noble raised his hands with a nervous expression and declared that he would also gift the undying Earl's homeworld 10 squadrons of elite mithril guards to protect them from star pirates. The other nobles looked somewhat confused. The more powerful and wealthy nobles decided not to sit idly by. The long-haired man clenched his fists and with a furious expression declared that he would send 1,000,000 sets of combat suits. All the nobles decided to gift Lu Sheng something. And our boy felt somewhat confused, not knowing what to say. Everyone was incredibly enthusiastic, frantically trying to forge connections from all angles. Which made Lu Sheng feel a little uncomfortable. With a forced smile, Lu Sheng began to wave his hands, asking them to calm down, as their enthusiasm was excessive and they should spend rationally. Not long after, space was filled with starships, as hundreds of billions, even trillions in rare resources, were continuously sent to Blue Planet. In the blink of an eye, the nobles filled the place with gold coins and gifts, an uncountable amount of resources and presents. Lu Sheng began to scratch his head while waving his other hand, with a nervous expression. Feeling that everyone was being too kind, his eyes began to shine with joy, a smile appearing on his face. Internally, he encouraged them to continue. Ideally, they should arm and empower everyone on Blue Planet and raise their cultivation to the 9th level of Martial Saint. This way, he could feel much more at ease even when he wasn't on the planet. After all, he could return the favor 100 or 1,000 times in the future, but he had never had the time to develop Blue Planet. This time, they had really done him a huge favor. As the nobles continued to offer gifts to Lu Sheng, a long-haired man was watching in silence not far away. It was none other than Lu Sheng's former master. His eyes were filled with envy. And all he could do was let out a sigh. Zheng Yu approached him and with a curious look asked, "Has the broken blade been reforged?" Hearing her voice, the martial saint's attention fixed on her, snapping him out of his trance. Closing his eyes, he replied that it had been reforged a long time ago and that now, finally, it was completely finished. Zheng Yu placed a hand on her waist and with a serene expression asked him why he was facing Lu Sheng for no reason. She explained that losing once to someone like him should be a source of pride. As from now on, thanks to Lu Sheng, their Blue Planet would truly rise with the tide. Several days later, a luxury yacht was sailing on the waters of the Ningyi Sea. On the boat, someone was lying in a hammock, enjoying a beautiful day. The sky was filled with spaceships. It was none other than Lu Sheng. He took off his glasses and his attention fixed on the ships as he saw another wave arrive. Even after Lu Feng and the others had left, a large crowd kept coming. Fortunately, Zheng Yu and the others went to receive them, or he would have gone crazy. Also on the luxury yacht was his wife, Snowy, who was now wearing a sexy swimsuit. With a smile, she adjusted a lock of her hair and mentioned that this only showed how popular he was. Lu Sheng stood up, walked over to her, and began to look into her eyes. Commenting that it was all social niceties, the same old story even among the stars. Snowy crossed her arms and began to ponder in silence. Lu Sheng caressed his wife's chin. His eyes began to shine with love as he stroked her face, warning her that in a moment he would be heading deep into the sea. He told her that if anything strange happened, she shouldn't worry about him and should get out of there as fast as possible. Snowy contemplated Lu Sheng in silence. Without wasting any more time, Lu Sheng gave her a kiss. Snowy hugged our boy, confirming that she understood and asking him to be careful with everything. While Snowy watched in silence, Lu Sheng leaped from the yacht and decided it was time to explore the sea. As his body was surrounded by martial energy, Lu Sheng began to dive towards the bottom of the sea with a confident gaze. He knew that nothing had changed. Blue Star would still be destroyed within 8 years, and although they no longer need Ed to worry about the planet's safety, as they could simply move. His eyes began to shine with serenity. But he was still intensely curious about what exactly the existence was that could completely annihilate Blue Star. Lu Sheng didn't lower his guard and began to dive rapidly. This was the place where the system's calculation had failed. During the battle with the extreme martial saint, he had been gravely injured. Falling into the abyssal sea caverns, where he encountered that indescribable being. A mutant, worm-like beast with sharp teeth appeared, but without much effort, Lu Sheng sliced it in half, pushing the insignificant creature out of his path so it wouldn't bother him. The demonic eye Lu Sheng held in his hand activated and began to glow with malice, capturing his attention. He had almost forgotten about this little gadget. The aberrant cells seemed to have a special reaction to that beam, which meant he was close. He decided there was no time to waste and using all his power, began to descend at full speed toward that place. Several minutes later, he reached the depths of the sea and landed softly with a serious gaze. Lu Sheng began to carefully observe the area, knowing that this must be the spot. The demonic eye began to glow with even more intensity and tentacles started to emerge from a boy's hand. Noticing this, Lu Sheng couldn't help but feel somewhat confused, as he sensed that something was wrong. The surroundings had suddenly fallen silent, while the mutated cells in his hand began to writhe frantically, as if trying to escape his body. He didn't lower his guard and became serious, as he felt that something was missing. Suddenly, he remembered the mental fluctuations. Before, whenever he was in the deep sea, there were seductive and deceptive mental waves luring him in, but now he couldn't feel them at all. While Lu Sheng was lost in thought, someone began to laugh loudly. Hearing this, Lu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise and fear. Not long after, a giant eye appeared and began to stare intently at Lu Sheng. Then something started to emerge from the ground, causing the ground to tremble, and the being declared that it had finally found him again. Lu Sheng's attention was fixed on it and his eyes widened in surprise. A giant demonic hand with sharp claws emerged from the seabed. Lu Sheng knew it was time to fight and used his power, causing golden martial energy to begin surging from his body. This is the end of the video. If you want to see the next part, then subscribe to our channel. A clawed hand emerged and slammed into the ground, causing malevolent energy to surge. Lu Sheng went on alert and, without losing a single second, leapt back. Just then, the hand moved like a thunderclap and appeared behind Lu Sheng, ready to snatch him. Noticing this, Lu Sheng activated his power, and his eyes began to shine with seriousness, realizing it was time to get serious. The hand attacked again, trying to crush Lu Sheng like a fly, but he wasn't going to give up so easily. In the blink of an eye, with his body surrounded by martial energy, Lu Sheng dodged out of the attack's range, avoiding being crushed and realizing his opponent had no chance of catching him. A demonic eye appeared, its attention fixed on Lu Sheng, considering him a cunning insect that it wouldn't allow to escape. The hand began to change shape, now sporting an eye. Lu Sheng approached it and, with a serene expression, recognized that his opponent was trying to use the same trick to drag him back into that grey bubble rift space. It was a shame. Having fallen for it once, it was impossible for him to be caught again. While Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with determination, he clenched his fist tightly and began to gather all his martial energy into it, making it clear that the same move won't work twice on a saint. Concentrating all his martial power, Lu Sheng unleashed a powerful blast of energy, which began to speed toward the monster. The monster focused, its eye began to glow, and in an instant, it absorbed the energy blast Lu Sheng had unleashed. With a furious gaze, Lu Sheng gave the monster the middle finger. A portal appeared behind him, and with a smile, he bade it farewell, daring the creature to follow him. The monster grew enraged, and its eye began to glow with anger, vowing that it would definitely catch him. Lu Sheng couldn't help but smile with an arrogant expression, telling it they could talk when it was actually able to catch him and that, for now, it didn't need to see him off. With no more time to waste, Lushing emerged to the surface and began to walk on the water in silence, lost in thought. Lushing closed his eyes, scratched his head, and let out a sigh. He realized it couldn't truly get out, so there was nothing he could do against it. Lushing extended his hand and golden energy began to emerge from it. With a serene gaze, he decided to use the power of origin to deduce the future of Blue Star. Not long after, a system window appeared, revealing that Blue Star would be destroyed in 7 years. Lushing was in shock, not knowing what to do. His eyes widened in confusion. The deadline had shortened by another year. He figured his incessant provocation had enraged his opponent so much that it was breaking through faster. Lushing placed his hand under his chin and began to ponder in silence. 7 years was definitely enough time to relocate all the humans from Blue Star. But to be safe, he could finish it in 3 years. Then his eyes widened in surprise, as a new possibility occurred to him. What if, when it escaped from the abyss, it didn't just cause a catastrophe that destroyed a single planet? Lushing began to imagine several planets and a demonic eye that, instead, engulfed an entire star region, or even an entire galaxy. With a nervous gaze, he extended his hand and martial energy began to surge from it. If that was the case, this was a serious matter, and he had better perform another projection. While Lushing was floating above the surface of the sea, several system windows appeared in front of him, revealing that the future of the entire Serpentis galaxy was being deduced. Several minutes later, a system window revealed that, 7 years later, the Dark Lord would invade. With the destruction of the White Mist Star, the Serpentis galaxy had become the frontline battlefield of the dark side universe. Seeing this, Lushing's eyes filled with surprise and his jaw dropped in shock, realizing that, because of him, countless life forms throughout the entire Serpentis galaxy had their lifespans shortened by a year. Lushing clenched his fist tightly and began to gaze at the sea in silence. Then his eyes began to shine with determination and a smile spread across his face. Now, every one of his movements affected the future of the entire star system. And he had to atone for the mistakes he had made. As blue martial energy surrounded Lushing, he clenched his fist tightly. The image of his planet being destroyed came to his mind. Then the image of the demonic eye clouded his thoughts. He had 7 years, only 7 more years. Within that time, Blue Star would be destroyed. The barrier between the dark side universe and this universe would be massively torn apart. The Dark Lord would invade, the White Mist Star would be destroyed. And the entire Serpentis galaxy would become the front line of the battle. Our boy began to imagine a worm entering an apple. If an insect bit into its peel, the people inside would suffer, or he could pierce the peel, go outside, and kill all the insects, thus mitigating this crisis. Not long after, the worms began to devour the apple. The other option was to wait until the peel was completely eaten away. Lushing's eyes began to shine with determination, vowing to be the one to close that breach. As he only had these 2 options, Lushing clenched his fist tightly and began to stare at it, knowing that, either way, he needed immense power to back him up. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to kill the insects but would be devoured instead. It was night time, and Lushing was lost in thought. He knew that a Dark Lord capable of causing the fall of an entire galaxy must be at least level 14 or 15, and he wondered at what age the future projection had said he would reach that level himself. Lushing snapped out of his trance and his eyes began to shine. He remembered 100,000 years, 7 years versus 100,000. Just with this, he could only give it his all. Without wasting a single second, Lushing extended his hand, and his martial power began to surge from it. Without much effort, Lushing concentrated his energy, which caused a shark in the sea to rise to the surface. Then Lushing began to look intently at the eye in the palm of his hand and, with a serene expression, decided to borrow it. Lushing tore the demonic eye from his palm. While his eyes were shining with curiosity, he approached the shark and shoved the demonic eye into its mouth. The shark was confused, not knowing what was happening. Then the shark's eye began to change, and malevolent energy started to emerge from its eye. The shark's form began to change. It grew demonic teeth and limbs with sharp claws. It had transformed completely. Far from being furious, the shark turned to Lushing and smiled, as if it were his pet. Observing carefully, Lushing realized that it had worked. He had succeeded in installing the mutation cell into this level 8 beast. The shark leapt and dove back into the water. Slowly, the mutant shark began to descend toward the seabed. Lushing remained silent. He would leave it there as a spy to monitor the progress of the digging in the abyss. The shark began to devour the fish that crossed its path. For Lushing, it didn't matter if the mutant cell ran into trouble. At most, he would only lose a bit of spiritual energy, as its main body was still within him. Meanwhile, on the surface of the Ningyi Sea, it was daytime, and the yacht was sailing at full speed. Several hours later, while his wife Snowy was enjoying the view, Lushing descended gracefully nearby and began to walk towards her. Noticing this, with a relieved gaze, she turned around and couldn't help but feel joyful upon seeing he had returned. Lushing took his wife's hand, began to look into her eyes, and with a loving expression, he proposed that they go to another planet. Snowy felt somewhat surprised and confused by Lushing's sudden suggestion. Without hesitating for a single second, she hugged Lushing, closed her eyes, and accepted, letting him know she would do whatever he said. Lushing hugged her back, realizing that she was the woman of his life. The next day, Lushing departed from Blue Star in the White Hole shuttle, traveling more than a dozen light-years towards a brilliant star. His ship approached a star that looked like the sun. Our boy's eyes widened in surprise and confusion as his attention fixed on something. In front of him was a giant and dazzling star, like the sun. As martial energy covered our boy's body, he realized that this must be the most suitable martial training ground for him now. This is the end of the video. If you want to see the next part, then subscribe to our channel.